Hi everyone, and thanks for joining me. Today we're making this project bag. This is a really versatile bag. It is great. You can close it up using the drawstring, or it stands open all by itself and you can work right out of the bag. Now I have created a tutorial for this and I'm going to show you how to make the small one. However, I do have directions in the description below the video to make a larger one. If you want to cut this out with your Cricut, I've also got a design space file for the small size bag. Now, I am using cork on my bag on the bottom portion. You don't have to use cork fabric. If you don't have cork fabric, you can absolutely use regular fabric. So without further ado, let's jump over to the tutorial. So let's go over what we need to make the small. For the outer part of the bag, you're going to need two pieces 6.5 by 10. I'm using cork. If you're not using cork, then you can cut the same size in fabric, but you're going to want to put some fusible fleece on the back of it. You're also going to need two matching pieces of fabric, 6.5 by 10, and I have put fusible fleece on the back side of both of these. I prefer to use fusible fleece. It just gives it that soft look. And again, if you're using the cork, then you are not using cork, you want to put fusible fleece on both the upper and lower. The next piece of fabric is the handle, and this one is cut to 9 inches by 4 inches, and I cut a 1-inch piece of fusible fleece, and I've put that along the left edge, and then I folded it into the center, and fold it in half. That's going to become our handle. Next, we're going to use our drawstring fabrics, and you're going to need two pieces cut to 4 by 9, and you're going to turn both of the short ends in by 1/4 of an inch and stitch that down, and then fold that in half and press. You're going to need 2 of those. Next, we're going to have the pocket for the inside, and this is optional. I cut mine to 6 by 8, and then you'll fold that in half, and that will become your pocket. And then our lining pieces are going to be 2 pieces of 12 by 10. So 2 pieces 12 by 10 for your lining fabric, and I've put Shapeflex on the back of both of my lining pieces. So that's everything you need, and again, I have the Cricut Design Space file in the description below the video. If you want to cut it out with your Cricut, I go ahead and put my lining and fusible fleece and interfacing everything on my fabrics before I cut it. So the first thing we need to do is take one of our cork pieces and one of our outer pieces and stitch those pretty sides together, or right sides together. You're going to stitch them right along the one long end, about 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, so now it looks something like this. You want to take it to your ironing surface, and you're going to open it up so that the fabric is going up, and you're going to fold that nice and tight up so that you're not folding the cork at all, just the fabric is folded. And you're going to do that to both pieces. You can use your iron and try to make that lay down just a little bit nicer. Just keep the iron off of the cork. So just push that down, and you're going to do both pieces. And once you have that done, you're going to take it over to the sewing machine and top stitch right along that top edge on the fabric side. And now you can see I have top stitched right along that fabric side on both of my outer pieces. Once you have that completed, you're going to take the 2 4 by 9 pieces of drawstring fabric, and again we've folded the short ends in and stitched those down, and then we're going to fold that in half. And now we're going to fold this in half just to establish where the center point is, and just give it a little bit of a finger crease. And then we're going to measure here the same way, or you could just measure over 5 inches, but it's just as easy to measure this way. So I'm just going to fold the fabric portion in half, and I'm going to center my drawstring fabric right up here, and the raw sides are facing up. So the folded sides facing down and the raw sides are facing up. And I'm just going to pin that into place. Going to do the same thing on the other one, and I'm just going to use the first one to line it up. It should be slightly shorter than the fabric itself. All right, we have those pieces done. Now we're going to add our handle. Again, I have taken my handle and added a 1-inch strip of Fusible Fleece along one edge, folded that in, fold the other side in, and fold in half. And now you want to stitch along the long end on both sides. You can run several lines of stitching if you want, or just one along each edge. And I just added 3 stripes of stitching down the length. You're going to fold that in half and put the handle facing in, or put the fold facing in. You can put it up towards the top if you like, or you could put it in the middle, wherever you want your handle to be. This handle is plenty long, so if you want to leave it hang off the edge a little bit, that is perfectly fine. If you want to add a label, go ahead and add that at this time. This is going to be the outer fabric. So once you have everything into place, you're going to base the drawstring fabric right in place just by stitching close to the edge and using a long stitch, and do the same with the handle. All right, now I've got my outer fabrics completed. You can see I've just got this lightly basted down. My handle's basted down, and I added a little bit of a label, and that's totally optional. You don't even have to add the handle if you don't want to. Now we're going to work on our lining pieces. Well, actually, let's work on the pocket first. Take your 6 by 8 inch pocket piece, and you're going to fold it in half, right sides together, long ways, just like this. And you're going to sew that along 3 sides, leaving an opening somewhere up in here where you can turn this right side out. So go ahead and stitch up and over, leave an opening, and then finish your corner and back down. Once you have that all stitched, you want to trim your corners so that you just cut off those square corners. That's going to make it look a little bit nicer when we turn this right side out. Make sure you don't cut through your stitches. And then reach inside that opening and turn this right side out. You want to have a bone folder or a chopstick or whatever you like to use to turn your corners. You need to have something to stick in there. You're going to stick it inside the hole once you get this right side out. And just punch out those corners and make sure that everything is nice and square. So I'm just going to reach inside that opening. I'm using a bone folder. If you're a paper crafter, you've probably got tons of these laying around. But there are lots of sewing notions for doing this, or you can just use a chopstick, whatever you have. Just make sure you don't poke through. And turn that right side out. And then your opening that you left is going to naturally want to turn in. If it doesn't, you can help it out a little bit. But go ahead and get those seams rolled out, and then you want to take it over to the iron and press this down flat. And I've pressed mine. Now you're going to sew. This is the end that I have my opening on. Right here. It's still open. So I'm going to go on the opposite end and stitch right across the top. So my opening's on the bottom. I'm going to stitch right across the top. So that stitch was just purely decorative. It doesn't really serve a purpose. It's on the folded edge of your pocket. But it's just going to make it have a cohesive look when we're done. So now we're going to take one of our lining pieces and fold it in half. Establish the center point. And this fabric's kind of hard to see where my creases are, but I'm going to use my lines on my grid mat to make it a little bit easier to see. And then you want to measure down about 3 inches, and you're going to place the pocket in line with your center mark. You can fold the pocket in half. That stitch line is going to be facing the top, and the hole in your pocket is facing the bottom of the bag. So now you're going to stitch around 3 sides. I'm just going to pin this into place. You're going to stitch around the 3 sides, down, over, and up. When you stitch that bottom, it'll close up that little hole that we left. So now I have my pocket stitched into place. I'm going to put my lining pieces right sides together, or pretty sides touching, and we're going to stitch down one side across the bottom, leaving an opening. So again, stitch down over to your opening. You're not going to stitch through here. Pick it up again. Make sure you back stitch at that opening and back up and towards the top. Now you're going to take your outer pieces, right sides together, pretty sides touching, and line those up. The first thing that you want to do is make sure that these seams line up Very important. That will show when you're on your finished bag if those don't line up. So you want to clip those together and do the same thing on the opposite side. We're going to line up the seams. This one's a little harder to tell because I put my tag right there. You want to make sure those are lined up as perfectly as you can get them. Again, these will show on the outside of the bag. And then go ahead and line everything else up and clip that into place. Once you have that into place, you're going to sew down, across, and up. Make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Make sure your cork is facing down. You don't want to sew the top closed. Okay, now you need to measure an 1.5 inch square, and I am measuring the 1.5 inch on my seam lines, not the corner of the fabric. So I'm using the square ruler. You can also just cut out an 1.5 inch square if you want to use as a template to mark around, but make sure you're lining it up with the seam lines, not the edge of the fabric. So I have an 1.5 inch square, and the reason for that is it's going to make all of your corners exactly the same. If your seam allowance was a little bit different from one side to the other, it's going to make a difference if you don't use the seam lines. So now we're going to do that on all 4 of the bottom corners of both our outer and lining sandwiches. So again, 1.5 inch square, just making a mark. Same thing over here. Should be marking on the cork, if you're using cork, on the outer part of the fabric. Making sure to line up with the seams, not the edge of the fabric. Very important. Makes your corners look much more consistent. Once you have those corners marked, you're going to use a pair of sharp scissors. It's easier with scissors than to try to do this with a rotary cutter because you'll likely overshoot and that will cause a problem. So just use some scissors and snip out those squares that you just cut on all 4 corners. All right, once you have all 4 corners clipped out, you're going to open up one of the corners. You're going to push the bottom seam to the right and the side seam to the left, lining up that bottom and the side, and clip this into place. Going to do the same thing on this side, making sure that bottom seam is going the same direction. So this side's going right and left. Just lining those up. You should have a straight line when you squeeze that corner together. You guys have done this box corners many times if you've watched or made any of my projects. So it should look something like that. You're going to do the same thing with the cork. It's a little bit awkward, but pretty easy. You're just going to squeeze that shut, line that top and bottom seam. Push one to the left and one to the right. Clip it into place. I really like these Wonder Clips for especially working with cork. You don't want to be putting pins in there. And again, we're going to make sure that seam on the bottom is going the same direction as it was on the other side. Push this one right and the side seam left, making sure they're lined up. Clip that into place. And then we're going to take this over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch with a 1/4 inch right across each of the ends. So it should be looking something like this. So you're going to stitch a 1/4 inch across there, there, and on the lining piece you're going to do the same thing. You're going to stitch all 4 corners with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, it should be looking like this. Here's our lining piece. We still have that hole in the bottom. You're supposed to. It looks kind of like a bucket. And here is our boxed outer piece. We're going to turn this one right side out. And it gets a little bit bulky with the cork, but you just take your time. It's totally doable. Don't get frustrated. Turn it right side out. I'm sorry I'm off camera here. Just working it right side out. And then you want to make sure and poke those corners out that we just boxed. Make sure everything looks nice and square. And again, I would probably use a bone folder or something. Just make sure that you're very careful that you don't push through. So we have our outer piece is right side out, and we have our lining piece wrong side out. We're going to put the outer piece inside the lining piece. So just stick it right inside. You might want to look at the pocket and figure out which side you want to be the front and which side you want to be the back. I'm going to put this right inside the lining piece, and again, you just have to work with it a little bit. So our lining piece is wrong side out and our outer piece was right side out. So the pretty sides are touching inside the bag. And you want to line up those side seams. And again, you're going to push one to the left, one to the right. And I'm just looking to see which way that seam is going from the bottom. So I'm going to make sure I push that the same way. It just makes it look a little bit nicer. Really, if you forget to do that, it's not really noticeable. So I'm going to clip my seams together first. And again, I'm making sure that seam is going the right way. So that one needs to go the same direction. I'm going to line it up with the side seam here and clip that into place. Once you have that into place, then you can straighten up the bag a little bit and continue clipping that so that it's nice and smooth. So I have mine all clipped into place. It should look something like this. Everything is nice and smooth. We're going to take it over to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch all the way around the top of the bag. I like to start on the side seam and go all the way around. 1/4 inch. All right, it looks just like this. You can see I've sewn all the way around the top of the bag. And now it's a little bit more difficult than the last time, but we're going to reach in that hole in the lining and pull everything right side out. And again, I used a bone folder to reach inside and make sure that my corners were nice and popped out. You can see I still have this opening. We're going to let that close by pushing those raw edges inward, and then we're just going to stitch that closed on the sewing machine. And once you have that closed, you can see I just stitched it closed. Nobody's going to see it. It's the bottom of the inside of the bag. I'm going to tuck that back inside the bag. And to make everything nice and smooth inside, you might want to take it over the ironing board and press it down a little bit. And then if you want to, this is optional, but I think it gives it a really nice professional finish. You want to take it back over to the sewing machine and stitch a 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch right across that seam, and that will just make everything lay nice and flat and give it a finished edge. All right, so now all we have to do is add our cording or rope, whatever you're going to use. I would recommend using about a 1/4 inch rope and about 30 inches long or longer. You can always cut off the excess, but your bag is about 10 inches wide, about 9.5 now, but you need it to be at least double that plus room to tie it. So you want to push it in one of your channels and out, and then back in the other side and come out on the same side that you started on. You guys are familiar with this, I'm sure. And once you get that all the way threaded through, you're just going to tie those two ends together. And then you're going to repeat on the opposite side. You're going to start on the opposite side that your strings are at now. Make sure you don't tie it so tight that it can't open all the way. So you can see it's fully opened and I still have a little bit of leeway. I'm going to put the string back on my safety pin and start on the opposite side and thread that through and out the other side. So again, I would recommend using about a 1/4 inch string. You could also make your own rope to put in it. That's what I did on my very first one. Once you pull that out the other side, you're just going to tie those together and you're done. You made your very first project bag. This is a really great all-purpose bag. You can use it for so many things. I love the fact that you can open it and it stands up by itself, and you can work right out of the bag if you're in your car waiting for the kids or whatever the case may be. I do have the design space file linked in the description below the video if you want to cut this with your Cricut Maker. If you want to cut it by hand, I've got all of the measurements in the description below the video, as well as the measurements to make a little bit larger of a bag. This is a small one, and I'm giving you the directions for a medium one, and you can make them really any size you want. I'm just giving you an idea or a place to start from. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, subscribe, and share. Share the video. Tell your friends. If you subscribe, click that notification button and you will be notified every time there is a new video on my channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, never stop making. See you. Bye-bye.